Thank you very much, Ariela and Radhika, for the invitation and the International Manifesto group. I am going to give some general ideas on how economic reforms have occurred, liberal economic reforms or neoliberal economic reforms have occurred over the past, it's now 50 years in Latin America. First of all, economic liberalism, in the new definition of liberalism, in the new neoliberal definition of liberalism, is associated to illiberal politics. There are no economic reforms done within a democratic framework, none. Chile in 73 was the first one with a coup d'etat. Argentina in 76 was the second one with another coup d'etat. Mexico in 1988 with a blackout of the electoral system so that Salinas de Gortari would be elected and proceed with the reforms was the third one. Peru in 1992, when Fujimori closed down the Congress, was the fourth one, and we can go on and on. So we know that what is now called economic liberalism is not associated to political liberalism, but to political illiberalism. Secondly, all reforms we have found in our different researches are designed by the law firms and the economic consultancy firms associated to the largest firms interested in investing in the country. So when somebody presents a law, a president presents a law to Congress, that law is designed by a law firm that works for the bank that wants to lead the banking sector, or by the by the investor, the foreign investor that wants to go into mining. They put the law. That is what is called now self-regulation, which we call state capture. And that is a common characteristic. Another common characteristic, and I presume it's the same case in Argentina, is that the grand design is done by World Bank personnel. The third common denominator is US government support. So when economic reforms are introduced and the problems of lack of liberal politics appears, what we have is US government support for the liberal reforms. And they put a blind eye on the political side of the thing. And it is now the political side of the thing is called populism. I don't understand what populism is anymore, but that's what it's called. So we have these three characteristics. And in the case of Argentina, there is a fourth element, which is common to itself. The first time Argentina went through a process of opening its economy in a drastic way was in 1956. And the person who did it was Álvaro Alzogaray, who was later member of the Mont Pelerin Society, of the neoliberal Mont Pelerin Society. That was after the coup d'etat that overthrew Perón and brought in the first economic reform, liberal economic reforms. Then they went through a second period of trying to reconstitute government policies and the role of the state. And in 1976, they again have a coup d'etat, this time done by Videla, with Martínez de Hoz, the Minister of Finance, who was strongly linked to the countryside, to the producers of wheat, of grains, and he did the economic reforms at a cost of 30,000 dead, and I don't remember how many people went into exile. That was the second one. The third one was done by in 1991 by Menem.
Sí, Domingo Cavallo.
Domingo Cavallo was sorry.
Menem
Domingo Cavallo did the reforms, and I found the reforms of Domingo Cavallo very severe, but those reforms were better accepted than the ones of 1976 or the ones of 1956. 1991, when those reforms came along, there were protests, but they lasted a shorter period, and they were not as profound. And inflation was put under control. And once inflation was under control, the government of Menem had all of the support. That lasted until, of course, the adjustment ended in a crisis in 2001, and that was the end of the story. And now we're going to the fourth liberal reform. In every liberal reform, and this to me is surprising, there is an industrial sector that disappears. In the first one, in the one of the 1950s, the aircraft industry disappeared. Argentina produced jets in Cordoba. It had fighter jets. It had, like the US, it had taken some German scientists to work for them, like the US, and it produced jets. And after the reforms of 56, the jets went out. They did that, the company disappeared. Then the second time around, it was the computers. Argentina had wafers and processors in the 1970s, made in Argentina. Well, that company disappeared, and Argentinian computers disappeared. And as we know and remember, the Brazilian processor could not be imported into the US. So that ended with the Brazilian processors as well. So every time there is an industrial branch that competes with a US branch, that industrial branch disappears in the adjustment period. This time around, it would appear it's the nuclear industry. Argentina produces for hospitals the nuclear inputs for cancer, and they sell them to hospitals all over the world. So probably this time around, that's the branch that is going to disappear. So it has to do also, so these reforms also have to do with the deindustrialization of the country in forward branches, no? And I think finally, what happens with the support, with popular support, is peculiar. We are surprised that Milei he won with 56% of the vote. So he has the majority. And he probably now has a greater majority. Why? Why does he have a greater majority? Because, and even though the classical neoliberals speak about this, I am not a neoliberal, but I agree with them. Inflation is a problem. Inflation ends up eroding your lifestyle. And what we have found, and we saw that in Peru, and I will speak about that in a second. What we have found is that when you have high inflation, the population takes side with those who think they can control inflation. So the population is against the adjustment, the idea of the adjustment, because they don't want to lose privileges. At the same time, it supports the measures that will bring down the inflation. So it's a complicated situation. People protest because they are losing some things. And at the same time, deep down, they support it because it's controlling inflation. So what you have at the same time is protests because the population is losing some rights, and simultaneously, the popularity of the president is going up. Now, I will speak about Peru for 5 seconds. In Peru in 1990, Peru was undergoing a hyperinflation period, much like Argentina. And the solution was to bring inflation down. And there were 2 ways of bringing it down: the soft landing and the hard landing. The left went for the soft landing, and that's how Fujimori was elected, with the left. Once he was elected, then international capital and the larger entrepreneurs said to him, look, we need here a fast solution, so we're going to do this. And they gave him a plan that was written down. That plan had been designed by Peruvian officials that worked at the IMF and the World Bank. So we cannot say it was the World Bank and the IMF in abstract. No, it was the Peruvians that worked there who did the design.
Okay.
They designed it, and then he applied it. He changed political sides, so he changed his alliances. And when we all thought the popularity of the president was going down, his popularity started going up. And we did not understand, because he did control inflation, but he had to introduce the reforms that international capital wanted. So he sent a package of laws, much like Milei has done, for reforms. He sent that to Congress, and since Fujimori had a minority in Congress, his laws were not approved. In April the 5th, 1992, Fujimori went on television and, with the support of the armed forces, said, we are now closing Congress because we want to produce in this country an economic reform that will bring down inflation for good and restore growth for good. And they shut down Congress with 80% support of the population. 80. So now we are looking at Argentina, and I am thinking continuously, nobody likes Milei. No. And the left wants something else. Yes. What does a population want? They want inflation under control. What else does the population want? To have growth restored. Peru had lost between 1987 and 1992. It had lost, I believe it was 20% of GDP. It shrunk. We also had a war at the time. So everything combined, we shrunk by 20%. Now, Argentina has been stagnant for the past, I think it's 10 years. So for the population, the offer of the president of restoring growth, plus the offer of the president of restoring inflation control, and the evidence, and that's why he says, I have shut down the public deficit quickly, because he's telling the audience, I am putting inflation under control. And yes, there's people that protest, but no, I am going to continue doing this because we want inflation under control. And that 56% that voted for him, plus some more, will support him. So the temptation is going to be, and this is where it's going to, I think, this is where it's going to come head on. The temptation is going to be for Milei if he presents another package of laws that is not approved in Congress, to say, all right, if I cannot govern with you, I will shut you down. And if he does that, which would be in my line of reasoning, it is his next step. It would have US support, and it would also have all of the money and support of international capital that is behind him anyway, because they are the ones doing the designs of the reforms. And in this case, it's explicit. It's BlackRock. I mean, we have a name. It's not an abstract. In 1992 in Peru, it was an abstraction. Now here it is. It has a name. So now the interesting thing is, if he does that, if he does shut down Congress, what else can he do? And here I want to recall what happened in Britain with Thatcher. What she did was basically disappear the unions, the trade unions. And some would argue that Thatcher's reforms were done in order to disappear the trade unions. So he's going to be tempted to shut down Congress. He's going to be tempted to destroy trade unions, demolish them. And he's probably going to be tempted to break up the political parties so that we don't have again in Argentina a government with an explicit representation of the people. We will have governments with explicit representations of particular interests. So his reforms are much deeper than just economic reforms, because everywhere where we have seen these reforms, from Mexico to Chile or Peru or Guatemala, what we see is that the political system changes, the political parties change, the form of government becomes much more authoritarian, and there is a loss in the role of trade unions, and it's transformed into what is now called civil society, which is not quite the same. And so I think that is where we're going with Argentina. On the front of foreign policy, I fear that what Ariela said is right. We're in a realignment of Argentina with the US in a time where the US is looking for realignments, when it has taken note that China is a main trading partner of South America, the main creditor and the main investor, and that China leads in renewable energy, plus it leads in clean transport, plus it also leads in pharmaceuticals, and apparently now it's going to lead in aircraft. That process of leadership, of technological leadership, is what the US defines as a national security threat. They started with a national security threat argument with Huawei cell phones and in the 5G, and now that's been massified. Now everything is a national security threat. Every item that has a technological advantage over the US is considered a technological threat. Now that, in this context, means that the US is looking not only for partners, it's looking for company to fight off the Chinese in the hemisphere. And one way to fight off the Chinese is to get them out of the economic dynamic. And that's the thing. Getting them off the economic dynamic is I think part of the game. That's why they broke the swap with the Central Bank of China. That's true. And so there we are. There is a comment here. If the Shining Path insurgency wasn't also involved in the coup of 1992. Shining Path was more of a pretext than Shining Path did exist. The war did exist, and the war ended in September of 1992. Those are facts. But what's also true is that what was deep down, what was at the bottom of closing Congress, was getting the economic reforms through. Fighting Sendero would have been defeated anyway. So that was on the military front. That they did not need to close Congress to defeat Sendero. That was that's that. No.
And Oscar, I can add something, that the Congress was closed in April, and the leader of Shining Path was captured in October. So
Yes.
you are right. I think the same as you. They didn't need to close the Congress to fight against
That's
Shining Path, but
right.
it was before Abimael was
It was
captured.
before a long time. And no, it wasn't. Does the lack of that kind of factor make it more difficult for Milei and Fujimori to close the Congress? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think Milei can close Congress because he will just say, he could just say, the political parties are not cooperating with our process of reducing inflation, and we need to reduce inflation definitely. This is the fourth time we do this, and we need to do it definitely. And I think that's the way, that's the route he's going to take. And he will have all of the support of the young people who have lived always in a stagnant economy with inflation. They're going to love a low inflation atmosphere. So I fear that. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.